Hello and welcome to day 20 of revising UPSC previous year questions for UPSC CSE 2027. In this video, I will cover GS1 of 2023. So let's get started. Question 1. Explain the role of geographical factors towards the development of ancient India. Geography critically shaped ancient India's historical trajectory, influencing settlement patterns, agricultural expansion, trade routes, and military defense, thereby acting as a catalyst for urban and imperial development. Look, you need not to draw exactly like this, but you have to actually draw the map like this, like the peninsular India, and thereafter you can show all these labeling, and if you want you can show these as well. You have to, because Himalayan factor is also important, right? If you draw the diagram like this, not exactly like this, means this kind of diagram, you will definitely score more marks. So go through this diagram. You can pause the video and go through this. The Indian geographic structural advantages. Himalayan barrier, natural wall, protects from invasion, source of major rivers, Gangetic iron core, Indo-Gangetic plain, this one. Fertile alluvial soil, we all know that. High population density, this is the reason, because for the high population, agricultural surplus, cultural political heartland, core of connectivity, monsoon maritime trade winds, southwest monsoon winds, northeast monsoon winds, all of this, right? So you can draw this. Now the role of geographical factors. River valleys, and urbanization. Perennial rivers, Indus, Ganga, provided fertile alluvial soil and water, fostering the Harappan civilization and later second urbanization in Magad, Gangetic plains. Natural barrier and defense. The Himalayan guarded northern frontiers, allowing political stability, while northwestern passes, Khyber and Bolan, facilitated cultural influxes, Indo-Greeks, Kushanas, and all. Monsoon winds and maritime trade. Seasonal monsoon currents enabled Indian Ocean trade, linking ports like Bharuch and Arikamedu to the Roman Empire and Southeast Asia. Mineral and resource wealth. Chota Nagpur's rich iron deposit empowered Magad to forge weapons and clear dense forest, adding imperial consolidation. Thus, geographical determinism provided the environmental foundation upon which ancient Indian civilization, economy, and political empire successfully flourished. What were the differences between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore in their approach towards education and nationalism? While both Gandhi and Tagore sought India's liberation and social regeneration, their underlying philosophy on education and nationalism reflected contrasting ideological nuances: utilitarian anti-imperialism versus universal humanism. Differences in approach. These are the aspect. Mahatma Gandhi and Tagore. So when it comes to nationalism, Gandhi was of the opinion that rooted in anti-colonial political resistance, Swadeshi and self-reliance, Swaraj. Tagore rejected narrow political nationalism, advocated universal humanism and cosmopolitanism, Vishwa Bharati. Education medium. Emphasized mother tongue vernacular, strictly opposed English medium instruction, favored vernacular foundation while remaining open to global literature and sciences. Educational focus. Nai Talim, basic education. Vocational, craft centered, moral, and self sufficient manual learning. Vishwa Bharati model. Nature centric, aesthetic, artistic, and intellectually liberating environment. Global outlook. Prioritized grassroots Indian rural upliftment and self sufficiency. Cautioned against xenophobia. Urged synthesis of Western science and Eastern philosophy. Despite divergent pathways, Gandhi's pragmatic grassroots activism and Tagore's visionary internationalism collectively enriched India's freedom movement and modern pedagogical philosophy. Bring out the socio-economic effects of the introduction of railways in different countries of the world. The 19th century expansion of railways revolutionized global economic integration and social structures, acting simultaneously as an engine of industrial growth and an instrument of colonial exploitation. Socio-economic effects, economic integration and industrialization facilitated mass movement of raw materials and heavy goods, fueling the fueling the Industrial Revolution in Europe and national market integration in the USA, transcontinental railroad, colonial extraction in countries like India and African nations. Railways served imperial interests, extracting raw materials to ports while flooding hinterlands with foreign manufactured goods. Dadabhai Nauroji's train theory. It is taken from there. Social mobility and urbanization. Accelerated urbanization by connecting hinterlands to industrial cities, democratizing transport and breaking traditional spatial and feudal barriers. Demographic shift and settlement transformed wilderness into agrarian belts in North America and Siberia, though often displacing indigenous tribal populations. Railways fundamentally reshaped modern global civilization, serving either as a catalyst for sovereign national prosperity or a tool of imperial economic subjugation. Discuss the consequences of climate change on the food security in tropical countries. Tropical countries are highly vulnerable to climate change, where rising temperatures and hydrological disruptions directly jeopardize agricultural productivity, rural livelihoods, and systemic food security. Consequences on food security, crop yield reduction, thermal stress, and erratic monsoons reduce staple yields, rice, wheat, maize. C4 and C3 crop photosynthesis degrades under extreme heat waves. Pest and disease proliferation. Warmer tropical microclimates accelerate pest multiplication. Example, desert locust surges and crop vector diseases. Soil degradation and salinization. Intense precipitation causes severe topsoil erosion, while sea level rises induces coastal groundwater salinization. Economic and nutritional vulnerability. Declining yields cause price volatility, acute rural distress, and heightened malnutrition. NFHS data reflects rising micronutrient deficiencies. This is the flow diagram. You can see flow chart. Climate change, erratic weather, yield decline, price volatility, and food security. You can draw it if you want. Otherwise, it is primarily more for understanding. Mitigating these threats requires immediate climate resilient agriculture, drought resistant crop breeding, and robust global technology transfer under Paris Agreement commitments. Why is the world today confronted with a crisis of availability of and access to freshwater resources? Despite water covering 71% of Earth, fresh water constitutes only 2.5%. Today, rapid anthropogenic pressures have triggered an acute global water crisis. Dual pillar framework for water scarcity. Dual pillar framework for water scarcity. You need not to again draw this kind of diagram, but you can see, you can draw similar to like one pillar, two pillar like that and label it. So physical scarcity, resource constraint causes pollution, over extraction, climate variability and change. Economic scarcity causes inadequate infrastructure, poor governance, inefficient management, interlinked. Physical scarcity is aggravated by economic factors and vice versa, results water stress and insecurity. Sustainable solution, conserve resource base, invest in infrastructure, Strengthen governance. Drivers of freshwater crisis. Crisis of availability, supply shortage, over extraction, unregulated groundwater mining for agriculture and industry outpasses natural recharge rates. CRISIL Niti Aayog warnings, climate disruption, glacier retreat and altered precipitation patterns reduce perennial river discharge, pollution, untreated industrial effluents and sewage render existing surface water bodies unfit for consumption. Crisis of access, distribution and equity. Economic water scarcity, inadequate infrastructure investment in developing regions prevent equitable distribution, geopolitical and urban disparity, transboundary water disputes, example Nile Mekong, and privatized urban supply exclude marginal communities. Addressing this crisis demands adopting integrated water resources management, rainwater harvesting, and universal rights based access under Sustainable Development Goal 6. How are the folds formed? Why do they constitute some of the most picturesque areas of the world? Fords are long, deep, and narrow coastal inlets formed through glacial erosion, primarily found in high latitude regions like Norway, Chile, and New Zealand. This is the diagram you need to draw. Steep rock valley, U-shaped valley, sea level, deep inner basin, steep, all of this, right? Formation of fords. Glacial carving, moving glaciers gouge out existing river valleys, carving steep-sided, flat-bottomed U-shaped troughs below sea level. Post-glacial submergence, as glaciers retreat. Post-ice age, rising sea levels inundate these deep troughs, creating submerged sea inlets featuring a shallow threshold at the mouth. Why they are picturesque? Dramatic topography. Sheer vertical cliff walls rising abruptly thousands of feet above serene, crystal clear blue sea waters. Scenic cascades and vegetation. Scenic cascades and vegetation. Meltwater creates spectacular hanging waterfalls. Seven Sisters, for example, contrasting against lush pine forest and snow-capped peak. Serene microclimate. Sheltered water provides mirror-like reflection and rich marine ecosystem. Thus, the dynamic synthesis of powerful glacial erosion and post-glacial marine inundation endows fords with unmatched natural aesthetic grandeur. Why is the southwest monsoon called Purvaiya? Purvaiya, easterly in Bhojpuri region. How, how has this how has this directional seasonal wind system influenced the cultural ethos of the region? In the Bhojpur region, western Bihar, eastern UP, and the southwest monsoons, Bay of Bengal branch gets deflected westward by the Himalayas, entering as easterly winds called Purvaiya, whatever. Nomenclature basis. The Bay of Bengal branch hits the northeast hills, curves along the Indo-Gangetic plain, and approaches Bhojpur from the east, earning the colloquial name Purvaiya, winds from the east. It comes from the Purv, if you know, Purv is east in Hindi. Influence on cultural ethos, folk music and literature. Purvaiya inspire iconic folk genre like Kajri, Swani, and Jhula, expressing themes of longing, romanticism, and agricultural rebirth. Agrarian rituals and festivals. Arrival of Purvaiya signals paddy transplantation. Celebrated through communal rituals, songs, and festivals like Tej and Nag Panchami. Cuisine and lifestyle. The moisture-laden relief transforms traditions. Local culinary traditions, bringing seasonal delicacies like puwa, sattu, and rainwater harvesting celebrations. Emotional metaphor. In Bhojpuri literature, Purvaiya symbolizes hope, respite from scorching heat, and emotional reunion. Purvaiya transcends geography to become a socio-cultural life force, deeply weaving atmospheric circulation into the artistic and agrarian fabric of Bhojpur. Do you think marriage as a sacrament is losing its value in modern India? Traditionally viewed as an indissoluble sacred union, samskara, Indian marriage is undergoing significant structural realignments driven by modernization, individualism, and shifting social legal norms. Shift from sacramental to contractual view. Rising divorce and separation. Increasing divorce rates reflect diminishing social stigma around dissolving unhappy unions. Individual autonomy, choice-based unions, live-in relationships legalized via Supreme Court ruling, and postponed remarriages challenge traditional ritual primacy. Economic independence, higher female literacy and workforce participation, reduced financial dependence, shifting marriage towards egalitarian partnerships. Persistence of sacramental values, enduring rituals, elaborate traditional ceremonies, family involvement, and community sanction remain deeply ingrained across socio-economic classes. Legal resilience. Laws like the Hindu Marriage Act still preserve the solemnization ethos while adding progressive protection. Rather than losing value, marriage is evolving from a patriarchal mandatory sacrament into a flexible, mutually consent based partnership balancing tradition with individual freedom. Explain why suicide among young women is increasing in Indian society. According to NCRB data, suicide among young women in India is a critical public health crisis driven by complex socio-cultural pressures, economic distress, and gendered vulnerabilities. Key drivers: patriarchal and marital stress, early forced marriage, domestic violence, dowry harassment, and structural inequality in domestic burdens cause severe psychological trauma. Conflict between ambition and constraint, higher educational attainment without matching employment opportunities or social freedom creates intense aspiration reality friction. Mental health stigma, absence of accessible mental health care combined with social taboo prevents timely intervention and psychological support. Digital harassment and isolation, cyberbullying, online harassment, and unrealistic social media expectations exacerbate isolation and emotional distress. Economic dependence, financial insecurity limits escape routes from abusive domestic environment. Addressing this crisis requires robust mental health infrastructure, telemanas, strict enforcement of anti-violence laws, gender sensitization, and systemic economic empowerment for young women. Child cuddling is now being replaced by mobile phones. Discuss its impact on socialization of children, replacing physical affection with digital screen immersion. Technoference fundamentally alters early childhood socialization, substituting emotional warmth with passive virtual engagement. Impact on socialization, impaired emotional bonding. Lack of tactile touch and parental warmth weakens secure attachment, hindering the development of emotional intelligence and trust. Deficit in empathy and interpersonal skills. Over reliance on screen reduces real world peer interactions, body language interpretation, and cooperative play, causing socio behavioral deficits. Cognitive and language delays. Passive content consumption replaces active conversational turn taking, delaying speech development and critical thinking. Early cyber exposure. Unfiltered digital exposure normalizes aggression, reduces attention spans, and creates risk of digital addiction. Erosion of cultural transmission. Bedtime storytelling and oral traditions are replaced by algorithm driven content, diluting value based social learning. To ensure holistic childhood development, active parental engagement, digital detoxing, and touch based emotional nurturance must be restored over virtual screen substitutes. What are the main features of Vedic society and religion? Do you think some of the features are still prevailing in Indian society? The Vedic period. The Vedic period laid the foundational socio-religious bedrock of Indian civilization, evolving from egalitarian pastoralism, pastoralism, pastoralism to complex socio-political stratification. Main features of Vedic society and religion: social hierarchy and Varna system. Early flexibility based on occupation transitioned into a rigid birth-based Varna hierarchy, Purusha Sukta, with growing patriarchal dominance. Family and tribal polity. Kula, family formed the core unit headed by Grihapati, early democratic assemblies. Gradually, Sabha Samiti gradually yielded power to monarchical Raja. Monarchical Raja. Naturalistic polytheism. Deification. Deification of natural forces. Indra, thunder, Agni, fire, Varun, water, without idol worship or elaborate temples. Ritualism and sacrifices. Emergence of complex yajnas, Ashwamedha, Rajasuya, incantations and priestly dominance, Brahmins to control cosmic order. Philosophical synthesis. Evolution towards monism and karma moksha doctrines in late Vedic Upanishads. Continuity in modern Indian society. Ritual practices and sacrifices. Persistence of Havan, sacred fire rituals, Agni, and chant recitation in marriages, housewarmings, and death rites. Social stratification, persistence of caste identity, endogamy, and patriarchy despite constitutional provisions. Article 15 and 17. Veneration of nature, reverence for rivers, Ganga, trees, people, and animals, cows, echoing ancient ecological sensitivities. Philosophical continuity, enduring centrality of karma, rebirth, and Upanishadic concepts in everyday worldwide. While modern constitutional values promote equality and secularism, core Vedic spiritual philosophies and social structures continue to deeply influence contemporary Indian society. Question 12. What were the major technological changes introduced during the Sultanate period? How did those technological changes influence the Indian society? The Delhi Sultanate introduced significant technological innovations, acting as a catalyst for agricultural productivity, urban craft manufacturing, military warfare, and socio-economic transformation. This is the diagram. Sultanate evolution, Sultanate innovations, water lift, Rahat, Persian wheel for lifting water, irrigation innovation, Chakra, improved spinning, boost to textile production, paper making, arc and construction domes, social impact, agriculture boost, urbanization, economy. Because of this is like that. This. Paper making, knowledge access, arc and dome, centralization of power, stronger state, apparatus, better revenue. Okay, so this is the diagram. You can make it like this. Not, you need not to obviously draw these things, but you can write. Major technological changes introduced. Agricultural innovations, introduction of the Persian wheel, Rahat for deep groundwater lift irrigation and widespread canal construction, Firoz Shah Tughlaq. Textile and craft technology, arrival of the spinning wheel, accelerating yarn production, treadle loom, and sericulture techniques. Paper and printing, introduction of paper manufacturing, replacing palm leaves and birch bark for documentation and literary works. Military and architectural tech, deployment of iron stirrup, horse shoeing, and siege artillery, alongside manjanik, manjanik, alongside accurate architectural engineering, true arc, dome, mortar, binding. Influence on Indian society. Agrarian, ex, agrarian, ex, agrarian expansion and prosperity. Enhanced irrigation boosted multi-cropping expansion, agricultural production and revenue base. Craft urbanization and artisan guilds. Mass production of textile boosted internal trade and maritime exports, expanding urban artisan classes. Democratization of knowledge. Cheap paper availability facilitated literary administrative record keeping, compilation of historical chronicles, and dissemination of Bhakti Sufi literature. Socio-military mobility. Superior cavalry technology strengthened centralized state power, while labor-intensive construction projects generated large-scale employment for urban manual laborers. The technological synthesis during the Sultanate period fundamentally restructured India's medieval economy and society, laying the groundwork for subsequent Mughal economic expansion. How did the colonial rule affect the tribals in India, and what was the tribal response to the colonial oppression? British colonial rule fundamentally disrupted the isolated, self-sustaining socio-economic and cultural world of Indian tribals, Adivasis, transforming them into subjugated subjects through commercialization, encroachment, and alien laws. Impact of colonial rule on tribals. Erosion of forest rights. Indian Forest Act 1865-1878 categorized forest as state property, restricting traditional jhum shifting cultivation and minor forest produce collection. Infiltration of outsiders, Dikus. British land settlements introduced moneylenders, zamindars, and revenue traders, inducing severe debt traps and land alienation. Disruption of tribal autonomy. Replacement of traditional village heads, Munda Manki system, with British police and revenue authorities destroyed customary self-governance. Socio-religious intervention. Christian Missionary Activist and Criminal Tribes Act 1871 stigmatized and altered native cultural identities. You can draw this map. This will definitely gonna give marks, and you will also remember things easily. Santhal Parganas, Chota Nagpur, Rampa, Gudem Hills, Bastar, right? Although the location is not accurate of Bastar, but still. Tribal response to colonial oppression, armed rebellions and resistance, outbreak of fiercely organized uprisings against colonial forces and Dikus. Example, Santal Hul 1855, Koha Kol Rebellion 1831. Messianic and millenarian movements. Leadership under charismatic figures like Birsa Munda, Ulgulan, who sought to restore a golden age free of foreign exploiters. Forest Satyagraha, non-violent defiance of forest laws during national movement. Rampa rebellion under Alluri Sitarama Raju. Though brutally suppressed, tribal resistance forced the British to enact protective legislation, Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, and laid the groundwork for constitutional safeguard. Comment on the resource potential of the long coastline of India and highlight the status of natural hazard preparedness in these areas. India's 7,516-kilometer coastline across 9 states and four UTs constitute a strategic ecological and economic zone, offering immense resource wealth alongside extreme natural hazard vulnerability. This is Bombay High, this is Sundarbans, and this is the coastline. High cyclone vulnerability, this coastal resource hub, this. So this is how you can draw it. High cyclone vulnerability zone, West Bengal, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, this entire region. What is the reason? Low elevation coastal plain, river deltas, high population and cyclone frequency. Resource potential of the Indian coastline. Blue economy and fisheries, exclusive economic zones of 2.02 million square kilometers supports marine fisheries, aquaculture and livelihood for over 4 million fisher folk. Energy and mineral reserves, rich offshore hydrocarbons, Bombay High, wave ocean thermal energy and heavy mineral sand like monazite, thorium in Kerala and beach sands, limonite and rutile. Trade and maritime logistics, maritime corridors handling over 95% of India's trade volume through 12 major and over 200 non-major ports. Ecotourism and biodiversity, mangroves, Sundarbans, coral reefs, Andaman and Lakshadweep, and scenic beaches driving coastal tourism. Status of natural hazard preparedness, strengths and achievements. Early warning system, INCOIS and IMD provide world-class real-time cyclone and tsunami warning, drastically reducing human mortality. Cyclone Biparjoy and Fani. Institutional setup, NDRF deployment, coastal shelter networks and disaster mitigation plan, NDMA guidelines, persisting vulnerabilities and gap. Unplanned coastal infrastructure, rapid urban development destroy natural shields like mangrove and sand dunes. Climate threat, rising sea levels, frequent severe cyclonic storms, and coastal erosion threatens coastal infrastructure. Unlocking coastal economic potential requires integrating sustainable coastal zone management. Sagarmala with climate resilient infrastructure under the Coastal Regulation Zone (CRZ) framework. Identify and discuss the factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation in India. Assess the significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions of India. India's rich megadiversity is manifested in its diverse natural vegetation ranging from tropical rainforest to alpine meadows, governed by complex physiographic and climatic interactions. Factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation, temperature and altitude. Variations from tropical sea level heat to sub-zero Himalayan altitudes dictate vegetation zones, tropical evergreen to alpine tundra. Precipitation and monsoon, rainfall variation, more than 250 cm in Western Ghats to less than 50 cm in Thar Desert, determine forest density and species composition. Relief and topography, windward mountain slopes, Western Ghats harbor dense rainforest, whereas leeward rain shadow region supports dry scrub. Soil heterogeneity, diverse soil profile, alluvial plains, basaltic black soil, saline coastal marshes support variety plant ecosystem. I don't know why I have this habit of, like you can see, it is written basaltic, but I read ballistic. I did it, and it is from childhood. I do not know why. I mispronounce the word. Like my mind replace it with the similar word. But then I have to correct. But it's okay. I do not know why it happened. Significance, if you know, then you can tell me. Significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions. In situ biodiversity conservation. Rainforest regions, Western Ghats, Northeast India, Andaman Island host global biodiversity hotspots containing endemic species, lion-tailed macaw, Malabar pit viper. Climate regulation and carbon sequestration. Tropical rainforest sanctuaries act as dense carbon sinks mitigating global climate change. IPCC recommendations. Hydrological security. Dense canopies protect headwaters of major river, preventing topsoil erosion and regulating monsoon runoff. Genetic reservoir preserves wild progenitors of commercial crops, medicinal plants, and rare flora against habitat fragmentation. Preserving rainforest sanctuaries through stringent enforcement. Wildlife Protection Act 1972 is essential for maintaining India's ecological balance, hydrological security, and global climate commitments. Why did human development fail to keep pace with economic development in India? India's rapid post 1991 GDP growth made it a top global economy, yet its Human Development Index ranking remains disproportionately low, highlighting a stark growth development divergence. Reasons for human development lagging behind economic growth. Jobless growth and informal economy. High GDP expansion driven by capital-intensive service sectors failed to generate adequate formal employment. Over 85% of workforce remain in informal sector without social security. Underinvestment in social infrastructure. Historical underfunding of public health spending around 2.1% of GDP and education 3.1% of GDP, lagging behind the 6% NEP goal, Niti Aayog reports. Persistent malnutrition and health deficit. High burden of child stunting and anemia. NFHS 5 data limits human capital accumulation, dragging down productivity. Regional and socio-economic disparity. Concentration of economic wealth in urban pockets and specific states. Southwest leaves Bimaru and rural regions deficient in basic social services. Quality deficit in public services. High enrollment masks learning poverty. ASER reports and primary healthcare centers suffer from manpower shortages and out-of-pocket expenditure traps. Gender inequality. Low female labor force participation rate and systemic structural discrimination constrain half of India's human potential. Bridging this gap requires transitioning from pure GDP growth targeting towards inclusive growth, expanding social safety nets, and heavily investing in human capabilities. From being net food importer in 1960s, India has emerged as a net food exporter to the world. Provide reasons. Overcoming the mid-20th century ship-to-mouth existential vulnerability, India achieved a historic agrarian turnaround, becoming a major net exporter of food grains, sugar, and horticulture. This is the diagram you can see. Core driver, institutional pillar, commercial pillars. So you can go through this export surge. Key reasons for the transformation. Green revolution innovation, introduction of high yielding varieties, HYV seeds, chemical fertilizer, and expansion of controlled irrigation in the 1960s exponentially boosted wheat and rice yield. Institutional and policy support, MSP framework, procurement via FCI and public investment in rural credit and mandis, APMC expansion provided price stability and production incentives to farmers. Infrastructure and water development, large-scale dam projects, canal networks, and rural electrification enabled widespread groundwater mining via tube wells. Diversification and high-value agriculture. Success of White Revolution, Operation Flood, and Pink Yellow Revolution expanded dairy, poultry, and oilseed outputs, enabling multi-commodity export capacity. Post-harvest and trade reforms, development of cold chain logistics, mega food parks, and export enabling agencies like APEDA facilitated international trade integration. R&D and farm mechanization, ICAR research innovations, and widespread adoption of farm machinery dramatically increased cropping intensity and land productivity. Sustaining this net exporter status amidst climate change requires transitioning towards sustainable climate smart agriculture and micro irrigation system under PMKSY and natural farming initiatives. How does urbanization lead to more segregation and or marginalization of poor in Indian metropolises? While Indian metropolises offer economic opportunities, unguided urbanization frequently creates socio-spatial segregation and socio-economic marginalization, transforming cities into dual domains of affluent enclaves and precarious informal settlements. Evidence of segregation and marginalization. Spatial segregation, slum cluster. Soaring real estate prices force low-income migrants into unhygienic illegal slums. Dharavi devoid of basic municipal infrastructure. Caste and community enclaves. Urban residential markets exhibit caste and religious discrimination in housing, rental purchases, reinforcing ghettoization and spatial divides. Informalization of labor. Urban poor remain trapped in low-paying informal gig construction jobs, lacking social safety, fair wages, or legal protection. Inaccessible infrastructure. Public transport and sanitation planning favor private automobile owners and gated communities, excluding peripheries where the working poor reside. Gentrification and displacement. Slum clearance and redevelopment projects often displace poor population to urban peripheries, cutting them off from livelihood and social networks. Counter tendencies, mitigating factors. Economic mobility. Metropolitan economies break traditional feudal boundaries, providing informal avenues for social upliftment. Targeted welfare interventions. Schemes like PMAY, Pradhan Mantri and something, DAY, NULM, and PM Swanidhi aim to integrate urban poor into formal housing and credit system. To prevent urbanization from deepening, prevent urbanization from deepening divides, cities must adopt inclusive urban governance, affordable housing policies, and participatory planning as envisioned in SDG 11. Why is caste identity in India both fluid and static? Caste in India presents a complex socio-political paradox. It retains rigid, ascribed traditional structural boundaries, static while dynamically adapting to modern democratic, economic, and urban landscapes. Fluid. It's a complex diagram, but you not need to draw, but you just go through the text. Pause the video, take a screenshot or whatever. Dimensions of static identity, endogamy and social spheres. Marriage remains largely restricted within caste boundaries across rural and urban classes. Matrimonial practices, deep-seated social stigma, untouchability and caste discrimination persist, particularly in rural hinterlands alongside violent enforcement of rural hierarchies. NCRB atrocities. Monopolization of occupations. Manual scavenging and informal low prestige jobs remain heavily disproportionately assigned to lower caste groups. Dimensions of fluid caste identity. Political mobilization and identity assertion. Caste has transformed from a ritual status into a dynamic democratic vote bank, forming powerful political coalitions. Example, OBC Dalit political movements. Sanskritization and affirmative action. Lower caste adopt higher caste customs or leverage constitutional reservation, Article 16, to achieve upward social and economic mobility. Urban anonymity and professionalization. Modern workplaces, public transport, and urban spaces blur ritual purity, pollution, taboos, allowing flexible social interaction. Subcaste consolidation. Formation of modern caste association and digital matrimonial networks, redefining traditional localized caste borders into national identities. Caste remarkable resilience lies in its capacity to modernize its form while maintaining its core social consciousness, necessitating sustained social legal interventions. Discuss the impact of post-liberal economy. Discuss the impact of post-liberal economy on ethnic identity and communalism. The post-1991 liberalized economy transformed India's socio-economic structure. While market expansion fostered globalized integration, it simultaneously reshaped ethnic identities and intensified communal friction through competitive market dynamics. Impact on ethnic identity, assertion of subnational identities. Global market pressures and regional economic disparities triggered localized assertion for resource control. Example, identity politics in the Northeast and indigenous land rights. Cultural hybridization versus resistance. Exposure to Western consumerism created adapt- dual trends, adaptation of cosmopolitan lifestyle alongside cultural anxieties that fuel ethno-cultural revivalism. Rise of middle class identity dynamics. Emerging middle classes leverage ethnic and caste networks for economic patronage and social security in a competitive job market. Impact on communalism. Impact on communalism. What nonsense. Communal. I know the word how to pronounce. Communalism. Sometimes I do not know what happened, man. Communalism. Impact on communalism. Economic competition and relative deprivation. Uneven wealth distribution and jobless growth exacerbate inter-community competition for scarce public job, land, and economic resources. Ghettoization and commercial segregation. Market forces and urban real estate markets often reinforce communal segregation, limiting cross-cultural spatial interaction. Digital mobilization and media. Liberalization of telecommunication and social media networks enabled rapid dissemination of polarizing narratives and targeted communal disinformation. Political economy of identity. Political actors utilize religious consolidation to align economic majoritarian promises with majoritarian identity consolidation. Political actors utilize religious consolidation to align economic promises with majoritarian identity consolidation. Navigating these challenges requires inclusive economic planning, robust regulatory oversight on digital polarization, and revitalizing civil society frameworks to maintain India's pluralistic fabric.